The world is old and the powers are weary. The god at the door of night has fallen, and the great enemy of the world has come back from the timeless void. The shadow has awakened the great evils to regain dominion over Ardar. Darkness shall cover the land, if not of the deeds of a small fellowship of elf friends. Join the players of this Dungeons & Dragons campaign as they fulfill the events of the Dagor Daggeroth prophecy and strive with Morgoth on the plains of Valinor. Welcome to the Undying Lands in Part 3 of the Inglorion Bastards trilogy, Trials of the Valar.
All right, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of the Long-Winded One podcast. I'm very excited for this series of interviews that I'm about to do, and they're kind of interviews and kind of virtual tours. I had a trip planned to England in March, and as everyone knows, March was a bad time to be traveling in the world, and I had to cancel my trip because of the whole coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. And I had these wonderful tours lined up in Oxford and Birmingham and several other places, and these wonderful tour guides who were going to show me around these places and talk to me a little bit about these areas that were important to Tolkien. And when I had to cancel my trip, I reached out to everybody, and they were just so great. And this person that I have with me tonight, she's been fantastic. Her name is Mary Moore, and she runs Birmingham Tours. And she gives tours of many different locations. What she told me was called the West Midlands. So Mary, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
And if it's okay with you, we'll go right to the Tolkien sites and start talking about them. I know just from emailing back and forth with you that you have a lot to tell us tonight. And we have 3 or 4 sort of core Tolkien locations to talk about. But afterwards, if it's all right with you, I'd like to find out more about you and about your tour company, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
And just for the listeners, I wanted everyone to know that before the podcast started, Mary and I talked about all the pronunciations because as I found out probably in the early 2000s when I came over to visit Wales, English is not pronounced the same on both sides of the Atlantic. And I was heading up into Med Wales and ended up, I needed a train ticket to Brecon, and it doesn't go direct to Brecon, but I had to stop in Abergavenny, and I didn't pronounce it correctly. I'm here. I am at Paddington Station when it first opens in the morning. A line is forming behind me, and I'm telling the guy I need a ticket to Abergavenny. He just looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" So I double checked all the pronunciations before we got started here, so I didn't butcher anything. But Mary, the first place I'd like to start, and you can kind of see it here on the Google Earth overview, is a place called Sarehole Mill. But here we have this first picture of the mill itself. I thought maybe you'd like to give just a little information about this place.
Yes, of course. Well, Sarehole Mill, we're very lucky to be able to keep some of these old buildings, and they're run as museums. But these would have been dotted all around the countryside because this was the way that, because it's in an agricultural area and the farmers would bring all their corn to the mill to be ground and turned into flour. And this is how the people used to survive locally. The farmers that had larger sort of farms, they would be selling it on, of course. But you've always had a water mill like this that would have ground the wheat into flour. And also, during the same period of time, when the big flour mills were sort of at the ports, because when all the flour or the corn was coming in to the UK, it needed quickly to be turned into flour, and the big mills at the coast would be taking all the main business. So in the centre of England, where we are, And all around the country, the smaller mills would be run by the local millers, and they would be doing as much as they could, turning out flour to sell, and also they'd be grinding bones and for fertilizer and any other thing that the farmers used to bring along that could be turned into food for the animals.
This building is beautiful, and I remember seeing pictures of it before I sort of did the Google Earth flyover, and it's like shocking when you do the flyover at how everything's sort of built up around it. When you first look at these pictures, you don't, you expect like, oh, maybe there's some country or some trees around it, but it's just like it's in the middle of houses, right?
Yes, it is now. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about. So Tolkien lived there right around, I think, 1896 to 1901. He was, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is right. So he lived there between the ages of 4 and 8. And so, can you tell us, was the mill still active around that time?
Yes, it would have been. In fact, it was active. The miller's son took it over when his father died, and it was still in operation in the 1950s, but it was doing other things as well. It became a florist's and, selling all sort of local produce. But then later on, in the 1960s, the mill and the land came up for sale, or the mill came up for sale. And there was a big subscription sort of they were trying to get money to buy the mill. This is Birmingham City Council, sorry. And they were trying to get the money to buy the mill, and Tolkien himself contributed towards it. And they managed to buy the mill as it is now. And then the council turned it over into a working mill again. And it's opened as a museum, which is great. And they do now do the grinding and producing flour. And they sell it quite regularly. But at the moment, of course, everything's closed.
Sure. Well, so this must have been important to Tolkien, so much so, in fact, that I think it is rumored, or he said as much, that he based the mill in Hobbiton on Sarehole Mill. Is that right?
Yes, I would say that that's correct. You see, the boys lived across the road from the mill. And when you look at the view that you've got from the air, you can see that there's water in front of the mill, and then there's sort of trees to the left-hand side of the picture. You see all this green? That's water with algae in it.
Yeah.
Because it's not being used or cleared at the moment. So you can see the trees all the way around that water. Well, the boys would have lived to the left-hand side, just off the picture. And those trees would not have been there. It would have been an open site. So they would have seen from the cottages, there were 3 houses, or 3 double houses, 6 houses, but cottages. And the boys lived opposite. So they would have had a clear view of the mill whenever they looked out the window or came out of their house. And the rest of the land here, you can see above, where you can see the mill in the centre of the picture, and all the land above that was all part of the what was bought under the subscription when Tolkien, and the local people all put money towards keeping all this land, because they didn't want houses to be built. You see all these on the left-hand side?
Yes, yeah. Those are the ones I was referring to, yeah.
Those are all fairly new housing. So when you go to the mill, you go in, this is the car park. People use it every day because they go along the walkways. You can see the pathway above the trees here. Yep. And this takes you for miles along the Mill Stream Way and back again this side. And this takes you into parts of the Moseley Bog.
Oh, fantastic.
It's all an area of scientific sort of interest. Mm-hmm. But because it's always, you get the name Moseley Bog, it's going to be wet and wet underfoot. So they couldn't really build on it. So it's a most fantastic place. In fact, parts of it goes back to medieval times and before, because you've just got the pathways and where people would have, farming would have been carried out. But people use it for cycling and walking now. Mm-hmm. So it's very much a leisure area for, and then taking your dog for a walk and going out for a half a day, maybe a day, just going along the Millstream Way. It's wonderful, and that's a beautiful picture that you've got there with the reflection in the water as well. Yeah, so if you can imagine you've been an 8-year-old child and perhaps younger, and that's what you saw when you came out of your front door. It
would certainly be formative, wouldn't it?
Well, you would want to go and have a look at it, wouldn't you? And because all these trees weren't here, you see, the boys they weren't supposed to go in it, but because the mill was active at the time, grinding flour, and it was pretty dangerous. You get the feeling that the miller was pretty annoying to chase the boys off. But of course he was doing that because once the mill and everything was working and grinding, there was no way of stopping things immediately.
Sure.
So it was a place of danger as well. And because they were grinding corn and they were grinding bones for fertilizer, they were covered in powder or flour. And that's where, when they were covered in the white, they were called ogres, the Tolkien boys, the names, you see, the nicknames.
Sure.
But that would have been an everyday occurrence with them going over there, because they would be drawn to that water as well, without a doubt.
Oh, wow. Well, so I have a question about the area itself. Now, this is called Sarehole Mill. Now, is this area still called Sarehole? Is it like a neighborhood? From everything that I've read, Birmingham started small and kind of grew and overtook the surrounding communities. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's right. It was because it started off obviously in the city centre that we have today. And when your towns or your villages were even coming up throughout history, it was usually where there was water and where there was an access to it, maybe one of the old Roman roads or something like that for the traders.
Mm-hmm.
So Birmingham was built up, and Birmingham is built on a hill, or many hills. And so it started at the river and grew up the hill, and then it started to expand all the way around, if you can imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
And because it was already in place, the church, the main church, and the market square was in place, and everything was growing. Just sort of the periphery would be just sort of expanding all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So this Sarehole would have been when Tolkien lived there. It would have been very rural, and in fact, they didn't have any gas or electricity there for lighting. So at night, in the houses, they would have to use candles or gas lighting or oil lamps. Street lighting didn't exist at all, so it was very much in the dark there. So you didn't go anywhere at night time unless you sort of had a purpose to go out.
Sure.
It was so rural.
And so is this area, kind of still called Sarehole, but more like a neighborhood of Birmingham?
It's what you'd call a suburb.
Okay.
Sarehole is the area within Hall Green. Hall Green is the main suburb, the name of the suburb.
Okay.
And Sarehole is in the centre of that. And, Sarehole is obviously prominent because of the mill and the history behind it as well.
Well, you mentioned a little bit earlier, the walking path that led to Moseley Bog. And I was wondering if we could transition to that now. Does that sound good?
Yes, of course. I came across all of this many years ago when my grandchildren were much younger, and I was seeing it through their eyes, sort of thing. My grandchildren were watching the videos and learning all about it, and it was from them that I got the names, you see. And I thought, well, it's close by, so I'll go and I'll do some research in it.
Sure.
And we went to found the house. It's amazing how quickly you find everywhere that you want to do with the mill and the boys. Because 264, number 264, we went to the house, and it's sitting proud. The three lots of houses are sitting proud on the main road now. And my grandchildren were thrilled to bits because they opened the garden gate, and said, "Oh, we're standing where Tolkien would have stood. Oh, now we're coming out of his gate. Can we go and run and touch his front door?" That sort of thing. The way children get excited about it. And I thought there's really got to be a lot in this, and I really need to, sort of concentrate on this a bit. So we went around the back of the house, and if you can take it back over to our right-hand side before you get to Moseley Bog?
Absolutely.
See, this is the algae and the water. Their house is just here. That's how close they would have been. The boys wouldn't have had these trees. They would have been coming out of a cottage there, and there was only 3 sets of 2 houses. Nothing else other than a house that had been built that's in among these, or this one here, in among these trees. Nothing else. Everything else would have been agriculture. So when you come away from the Tolkien's front door, if you like, and you come down this way and you turn right, you have to go now into this new estate. Well, going by the stories, this is where Tolkien would have been chased off by the farmer. It says
some
of the stories that the farmer used to chase them.
Is that Farmer Maggot?
Yeah, and that's where they got because he decided to keep that in because they were terrified. And there was also a part, or wasn't there, where one of the hobbits, they said that they were going to be fed to the dogs.
Yeah, Farmer Maggot. That's the That's
the same one. Well, you see, they would have. I mean, they'd only been about 5 and 6 years of age, and possibly even a year younger. But they used to go through that area because that was all fields, and they would be going through where the mushrooms were being grown. If they went, because there's little pools everywhere and streams, the whole place. That's where the whole area is underwater almost.
Mm-hmm.
So streams everywhere. So they'd be paddling all the time in the brooks. And of course, the farmer ran away or took away his shoes one day.
Yeah.
And so he had to go. It's like when you're that age and you have to go and own up to say that you've been coming on somebody's land. You've got to ask for your shoes. So this is where they would have been chased off many times, going through that. Even if it was only the farmer trying to scare them off, not necessarily to do anything, but just to scare them off, to get away from the mushrooms, I suppose. And then you would continue on, and we would, if you were here now, we would be going up. If we can sort of skim over to the left now, we would just be going over as far as here, this bit here, because this is the beginning of it. So the boys would have walked across that, which would have all been fields, covered in trees like this, as it is now. And then you go up, you walk up a muddy slope now, and that's where you go into Moseley Bog, because Moseley Bog, it's the whole thing. There are streams all the way through it. And the photograph that you showed me with all the duck boards, walking boards.
Sure, yeah, we'll
they
come to that.
were put in when the whole area was becoming very popular, because this exactly right. You see, people wanted to come and see Moseley Bog. It took on a life of its own once the films were out and people were paying more attention to the books. Everybody wanted to come and see. And so luckily, the local council put these walking boards because it keeps you above the mud. Otherwise, you on a bad day, you can be up to your ankles in mud and get very far. But it was also, of course, people with wheelchairs. So it's made it wheelchair friendly as well.
Well, I'm really glad you gave us that background, because in the Fellowship, right, the first book of the Lord of the Rings, it is, they meet Farmer Maggot on the way to the Old Forest, and Moseley Bog is the inspiration for the Old Forest, where Old Man Willow and Tom Bombadil and Goldberry live. And you can see from these pictures, how these trees they look lifelike.
Yes.
In the tree. So can you describe being in the bog now? Is this
It's the most amazing feeling, again, because I was new to the books and I hadn't seen the film at that stage, and with 2 young grandchildren, and we were walking around, and it's just going back into almost, a very, very medieval forest, almost an ancient forest, because they've got these walkways all the way through, quite rightly, because people use them to get from one end to the other and walk their dogs and everything. But it hasn't lost its eerie feeling. And I can remember standing, we went down into a quite a dip, and it might have been just near the other photograph, the previous photograph of the Moseley Bog. And there was a small sort of a pool by the side of it. And then we walked around the side, and then we walked down into a dip. But the trees are enormous, absolutely enormous. If you can imagine a 5 or 6 year old standing there as well, how tall those trees would be. And I said to my granddaughter, and I said, what is it about this part of it, Olivia? I said, there's something about orcs. This is, I was a novice. I said, there's something about orcs. I said, they're trees, aren't they? And I said, listen to those birds. I said, what a racket. She says, Nan, she said, that's exactly the sound that the orcs make when they're talking on the film. She says, it's like a bird croaking.
Man, now you're making me wish I really was there.
It is so atmospheric.
Yeah.
And you want to go on and go through the whole thing, but when you're looking at all the other places associated with Tolkien, there isn't always time, but it gives you a great taste for it, and it's just the most amazing place. Place.
I don't know how into flora and fauna you are, but do you know trees at all? So the Old Forest, the character that you remember most from the Old Forest is Old Man Willow, other than Tom Bombadil, of course. Are there willow trees here? Would that have been a direct inspiration from Moseley Bog, or do you know if willow trees are sort of in this area?
Yeah, well, willow trees would be wherever there is water. And funnily enough, if you look back at the mill, we're looking at it, on its left-hand side, there is a willow tree, or the remains of a willow tree, I understand, because around about here. And it keeps on coming up. They keep on having to cut it back. So whether I don't know whether you can see it there or not, but that's what you'll see around there. So yeah, anywhere where there's water, you'll find a willow.
Interesting. So I guess there'd be lots of willow trees in a bog.
There would be loads of them. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's if it's okay with you, we'll transition now to ask about Tolkien's schooling, and I'm gonna advance the sort of Google Earth flyover. Now, this is interesting. So he went twice. He went to the King Edward School. He went there in 1900, and then they pulled him out and sent him back again in 1903. However, the site that I'm taking you to now is not the site, and correct me if I'm wrong, that is not the site of the original King Edward School.
No. He went to, first of all, back in Sarehole, the mother, Mabel, decided that she was going to, lack of money, and because where they were in Sarehole, they couldn't get anywhere. So she was going to educate the boys at home. And it was she actually that passed on, she was teaching him German. But he got the love of languages from his mother. And she educated him to a stage where she couldn't do it any longer. He had to go to school. You see, the laws step in England, and children have to be educated properly. There is an opt-out now, but I won't go into that. But she, I think, would have wanted him also to be mixing with other scholars and not be, running around wild in the country for any longer than was necessary. So he was obviously very bright, because he passed a scholarship to get into King Edward's, and that was the entrance. That was the only way you could enter King Edward's, was by taking the scholarship and passing. Mm-hmm. So he was obviously a bright boy. But the problem was, because they were living in Sarehole, it was nowhere near transport for him to get into Birmingham city centre. So they had to move out of Sarehole and move to a place called Moseley Village, mm-hmm. which is probably only about 7 minutes drive in the car, but it would have been too far for a young boy to be walking to get a tram to go into Birmingham. So he went to the first time into New Street, into the King Edward's, the old King Edward's. You've got the picture of it up there.
Yeah.
And that was formed in 1552. Do you want a little bit of history about that?
I would love that, yes.
Well, it was founded by, you see, in England, everything that was governed, if you like, locally, was run by the guilds. And the guilds, they were like unions, really, I suppose, early unions, because they would, if you were, say, a carpenter or a stonemason or a butcher or anything at all, any trade, and you'd served your apprenticeship, the guild would be sort of overseeing that, and they would make sure you did your 7 years or whatever. But they'd also make sure that there was nobody else coming in taking work and that sort of thing. They would be in charge of all of that. And the Guild of the Holy Cross in Birmingham was also in charge of education, which was a big thing, even going back to the 1500s. So in 1552, the Royal Charter of King Edward VI was it formed, and it was the first school was before that one even, on the same site, but the Guild Hall, which would have been like if ever you've seen a medieval film, and it'd be like a guild, like a hall where. Yep. Dinners and all that sort of thing, and special invitations you'd get in there. Mm-hmm. So the guild, that's where the school would have been. And I think there was only about, I think they were educating only about 20 children there. But then when they started to, the Act came in, or the charter was imposed, then it became more popular, and then there was about 70 boys were being educated there. And by the 1680s, because it had got this charter, there were close to 200 boys in that building that you're looking at now. Mm-hmm. So that was a bit of overcrowding as well. So in 1731, they decided that the school should be pulled down. It wasn't fit for purpose, really, and it needed to be rebuilt. But not moving very quickly. In 1835, they had a new headmaster. And he arrived and he had a new building erected on the same site in what we call a Gothic revival. Similar styles to, say, for instance, our Houses of Parliament in Birmingham, not unlike what you're looking at there. So that was the New Street site. But then moving further on, by 1936, the old building had become a fire risk. And you mentioned a fire in your note, and it said plans were made to move the new site to Edgbaston, where it is now, along with the girls' school, which they by this time in the 1800s they'd introduced the girls' schools into the King Edward Foundation. And so along with the girls' school, they moved out to Edgbaston, where they are now, into temporary buildings. And unfortunately, it was the temporary buildings that burned down. So on that site, so they'd left one school in the centre of Birmingham, and the one they'd moved out to had burned down. So they were forced to move again, but only for a short time, directly across the road, minutes walk into the Birmingham University. So they used the main buildings, the Great Hall there, and some of the surrounding buildings. And then the war was here, came along. And some of the school children had to be moved out. But they say that by 1940, enough of the new building that you can see there now had been finished. So they started to move the students into there that were available, that weren't being sent to the countryside. Mm-hmm. And then in the 1950s, so they've got the boys' school and the girls' school alongside each other. So 1950s, they came up with the swimming pool. And also they built a chapel. And the lovely thing about it is the chapel is actually one of the corridors from the original King Edward School in New Street. So we've got this very, very old chapel on site there that's just so lovely to go into because it is medieval. And then you come into this, sort of 20th century school and surrounded by it. And it's just lovely. And today they've got girls, 560 girls, and 825 boys are educated there.
Hmm.
And they've got all the most fantastic facilities up there. I'd love you to see the size of their playing fields, because you go up there and it's where they're playing cricket. In the summer you can usually see it, and it's just amazing. And it's next door to a very expensive golf course,
Hmm.
which is a great place. But what you're showing now, that's the girls' school, which is very appropriate with the roses, I thought.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're in Edgbaston now, right? So there were two other locations here that you actually mentioned to me. I didn't know of them, so you're going to have to really tell me a little bit about the history of these, and sort of their authenticity when it comes to Tolkien. So the two sites in question, and I'll just advance to that now in the Google flyover. They're the Edgbaston Waterworks Tower and Perrott's Folly Tower.
Yeah.
So can you they're often referred to as the two towers in Tolkien's Birmingham. Would you like to start at the Waterworks?
Yeah, Waterworks Tower would be fine. Now we're looking at the Waterworks Tower, which is that building there. When the boys moved to Edgbaston with their mother, it was because the mother had become a Catholic, and she was looking for somewhere that she felt comfortable, to live and to worship with the boys. But when Mabel died, unfortunately, the boys, they'd already made friends with the parish priest, Father Morgan,
Mm-hmm.
and he became sort of he agreed to look after them for as long as it was necessary, but they needed somewhere to live, so they went to live with an aunt in Stirling Road. And if you were to look off to the side here is Stirling Road. It's probably where we're standing now, looking up at it.
Okay.
It would be across here. So they lived on the other end of the street. In fact, number one, the first house that you come into Stirling Road. But this end of the road, they would have seen two towers every day. The boys were great adventurers, and they were always looking for things, always great interest in everything and a great imagination, because they were looking for buildings like this. Now, this is the Birmingham Waterworks Tower. And this was built in Victorian times, and it was very much an industrial city. So parts of this area would have been built up when Tolkien was living there, mainly because of these waterworks.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the canals were coming in, because we're not far out of the city centre here. So there would have been canals bringing coal into the area. The boys would have seen almost every minute of every day, they would have seen carts and horses bringing in loads of coal to be put into the furnace here.
This isn't around 1905. I think that they are living with their aunt on Stirling Road.
Yeah.
So that would have made Tolkien like 12 years old.
Yes. Yeah. So they would have seen this. As I said, it's a very industrial city, and was there. So the tall chimney would have been one of many. The skyline would have been crowded with tall chimneys belching smoke. But this is a beautiful red Italian red brick and ornamental cream brick. So this was built in 1862, and it's standing next to the boiler house, which is the smaller square building, the engine room and the workshops of the Waterworks Tower. And this was pumping water day and night to bring water out of the boreholes in the ground to supply the city with water. So that noise would have been going all of the time. If you didn't hear it, you'd feel it. You would never be without knowing that the pumps were working.
Be like living near a train station.
Absolutely. There would never have been any moment that you wouldn't have had that noise and that sort of underground feeling. So this was one of them. And so, of course, they would have seen this, but they would have seen, going along with the period being very industrial, and a lot of furnaces, a lot of factories, and a lot of coal merchants, because everything was powered with coal at the time. So the men were delivering all of this and working on it would have probably had black faces. I'm sure as a child, I remember all the coal men that delivered coal all had black hands and black faces from the coal dust.
Hmm.
And they would have seen lots of men with horses and carts and ponies and traps and that sort of thing, or even hand carts all merging round here. So that would have been a very, very busy place for them. And then just a little bit up the road to the right-hand side from where we're standing is the other tower. See, that's the Waterworks Tower we've just spoken of.
Hmm.
If we go just up this way,
Okay, let's go there. We'll do the flyover here. A very slow flyover to the next tower.
yeah, you see all this now because it's not work. I mean, we've got better ways of getting water into taps, so all this factory part has been knocked down. But then you see right away here, if we stop,
Oops. Yep.
you can see the trees again. Trees everywhere, although it's a housing estate. But this is Perrott's Folly. And it was built for a man called Perrott. And it was, this we think is the second tower that we think Tolkien might have referred to. So it was built for Henry Perrott in 1758. And it's a lovely red brick. Red brick was the main sort of material for Birmingham, not only because we didn't have land that was good for agriculture. We had a very, very poor soil. And so when they started producing bricks from it, it was always red. That's why a lot of our houses and buildings are this red brick and terracotta, which is, I think, lovely in the right place.
I do too.
But you see, we know it's always going to be something to do with government or local government if it's going to be red brick or something of importance. But this was, as I say, this was Henry Perrott's, and he had this built next to his hunting lodge, which would have been here. This is now a doctor's surgery, but there would have been a lodge here where he lived part of the time, of course. And it was called a folly. And follies were towers that were built for no apparent reason, mainly because you could afford to.
I got it.
And in fairness to the people who had them built, it was quite often to provide work for local people who hadn't got any work.
Ah.
So they would design or say, I'll have a tower built there. And it provided work for a group of men that were living locally, put food on the table for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But this was all an ancient hunting forest. It was owned by the lords of the manor of Birmingham in the 1400s. So it would have still been a deer park or a hunting park when Perrott had the tower built. Nobody's really sure exactly why he had it built, because they say that, he used to entertain up here, that's 6 floors up with a spiral staircase.
Mm-hmm.
But he used to entertain his friends a lot. So the servants used to have to carry all the stuff up the spiral staircase. So this is exactly how narrow it is, as you can see. And so they'd have to carry everything in from the ground floor and up this spiral staircase and do all the entertaining there. And of course, while they were there, they could watch and see where the deer were in the park.
Oh, true.
And the other thing, they think that he might have used it also for his daughter. He had a child, and she used to go up there, and she would be able to see him while he was hunting. So it was. The other thing is, his wife had died. She lived in a village outside Birmingham, and they say that you can see the village from the top. But I'm not sure about that. But it's a nice one to add.
And so Tolkien would have lived, between these two towers?
He would have lived nearer to where this one. Well, you see, he lived in different addresses.
Oh, see.
The first address he lived at with his mother and his brother, that's totally gone now under the new housing estate.
Okay.
And the reason why there was a break in his education is because when his mother first went up to the Oratory Church and she met Father Morgan, and she felt confident being there, and she felt that the children were going to be okay. Father Morgan suggested that in order to save her some money, instead of sending Tolkien into the city centre to the King Edward's School, he said, we've just founded the Oratory, or the Oratory is in its infancy, and we're opening a very good school here. If you'd like for Ronald to come and join us in this school. And she was confident that that was the best thing, but she realised soon afterwards that the level of education wasn't anywhere near what Tolkien had been used to in New Street. So he was sent back, and that's why the gap is there.
See.
And it would also be around about the time when Mabel was ill, because she had diabetes, and in those days it was an illness that you didn't recover from. So there was a lot going on in the family, but anyway, education was foremost in Mabel's mind, and so Tolkien was sent back to New Street, which was probably a good thing.
Sure. Well, this is fantastic. And Mary, thank you so much for sharing this with us. I'd like to ask a little bit about you now, and how you got into, giving these tours, other than that you said your grandkids, is that right?
Yeah.
Sort of tipped you off on Tolkien, but how did you get into becoming an expert in local history and taking people around?
Well, I started off, I've always had a love of history. I came to Birmingham when I was 10. And very, very briefly, I was born in Ireland. My father was in the RAF in the war, Second World War. After the war, we all came to Birmingham. I got 4 brothers, and we lived in the countryside. But my father died, and then we had to move to the city. So it was that huge change from countryside into an industrial city. But I did love the buildings, and I loved the history. I used to read as much as I could, and I used to go and find places, walk to places and find them. And when I was in a position, when I was in my mid-50s, I took early retirement from the company I was with. And I thought, now my children have grown, I'm going to do what I want to do, which was probably a bit daft. But I'd always wanted to do something in history. So I went to the university and I took a local history at the university. And then I thought, I quite like this. And I've always been interested. When you see people doing walking tours, and I think, they must know so much. I'd love to do that. Mm-hmm. And I did get the opportunity to train about 20 years ago. And I've never looked back. I've been doing it for 21 years now. I've worked all over the world, taking people on holiday. In fact, I've been to Boston a few times.
Ah, yeah. Well, next time you come, I'll be glad to give you a tour.
I only ever knew Banana Republic, because that's where you could pull in.
Oh, you could just strike that from your mind.
I remember we used to have a guide used to come on board, and he'd take us for a coach tour around the city. Yes, I have been to Boston a few times. But then once the grandchildren arrived, I didn't want to miss them walking and talking, and I gave it up, and I trained to be a local guide. So now I work in Birmingham and Stratford-on-Avon and Warwick and the Cotswolds and Oxford mainly.
So you're all over there. I mean, what are we talking in terms of distance from all these places? Do you have to, is it like, 30 minutes to drive there from sort of?
Well, the closest would be Warwick and Stratford. I could probably do it in about 40 minutes. But the Cotswolds, it's anything, depending on where you meet in a group, and going down to Oxford, that takes about an hour and a half to get there. But I just love it. It doesn't matter to me if it was 200 miles. I just love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're going to be fortunate enough to learn from Dr. Andrew Higgins. He's going to join us to talk about Warwick and Great Haywood, two other sort of Tolkien-centered areas. Both of those were places that inspired the Book of Lost Tales and some of the places in there. So let's talk more about you now. I want to list your website here. Your website is birminghamtours.co.uk. Is that right?
Birminghamtours.co. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. And so we know sort of where you give tours, but can you tell us a little bit about how it works? Because I know from taking a few of these tours myself, not all tour companies do it the same. So can you tell us about the process?
Yeah, usually with something like this, I have to be honest, I get more tours from maybe university students that are just graduating over here, American students. And before they go back home, they want to see where Tolkien lived, which is rather nice. So quite often I get a call and say, look, we're touring, we're going from wherever, Leeds University or Manchester, and we're coming down through the Midlands doing Stratford, and we'd love to see where Tolkien lived. Can you take us? Which is perfect, because it's easier if the people have got a vehicle, because we can do the tour around. It doesn't take so long to get from Sarehole Mill up to Edgbaston. It doesn't take hours, it's only 7 miles, but it does help if it's just in one vehicle. And then the others, it's usually university groups, they have a minibus and that sort of thing, so it would be mainly in the client's vehicle. And we could do the Moseley Bog and Sarehole Mill and Edgbaston as well.
Now, do you get out and go for walks around there with them?
Yes. Yeah. What we do is we park up at Sarehole Mill, and then usually have a kind word with the rangers who are in Sarehole Mill. Can we come in and have a look at the workings of the mill? Because we're doing a tour. And I always add there, foreign visitors, they're going to do a bit of advertising. So we do that, and we walk across the fields, and then we walk over to the house where the boys lived, and then through Moseley Bog. And of course, everybody, I tell them in advance, please have shoes that you don't mind taking, if you're not taking home, because if you slip and you go into the mud, then it can be a bit gruesome. But yes, it's all in the open air. That's the other thing. It's all in the open air. The only place we can sometimes go in is when we get up to Edgbaston, if the oratory church is open and the clients want to go in and have a look at the church where the Tolkien boys, because they would have been altar boys, so I think they would have served mass in the oratory as well. And they were associated with it, obviously, because of Father Morgan. But the priests, they love to see visitors because they launch into their side of, the education of Tolkien and the church as well, which is rather nice. A beautiful church.
Well, Mary, one of these days I'll be there. I'm gonna make this trip, and we will do this tour together.
Absolutely.
Well, is there anything else you want to leave us with? Any other little bits of history or personal information?
Well, before I go into that, we've given out my website. Can I just say that the website I'm having problems with, please don't use contact me. There's a box on the front of it that says contact me. That doesn't work. Just use the email address, which is great, or the telephone number.
Yeah, it's really easy to see. It's right at the top of the website. Right.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Great.
Yeah, it's just lovely to. From my side, I'm interested in Tolkien the boy and Tolkien, the man, and it's just lovely that we've got so much to show in a small area, really.
It's so rich. It's like living in Boston. There's so much to see here. When I first moved here, I felt the same way. I'm sure that you did when you moved there. So.
I know that all my clients used to heckle the tour guide shouting, "The British are coming, the British are coming."
We hold no grudges. Well, Mary, thank you again. And I want to encourage everybody to go to birminghamtours.co.uk and contact Mary Moore for a Tolkien tour of Birmingham or anywhere in the West Midlands. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely.
Though this marks the end of the episode, the road goes ever on. Until next time, join us at longwinded.one and consider giving us a review on Apple Music, Spotify, or really whichever platform you choose.